My husband thought I would accept his permission for another woman. The silence that followed those words was so thick I could have cut it with the butter knife trembling in my hand. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would. And if you, for a single second, feel like this sounds familiar, I just ask that you hit the like button and subscribe. It will help me to keep unburdening myself. My name is Grace Miller. I'm 63 years old, and until recently, I believed my name was a cruel twist of fate. I live in Scarsdale, New York, in a 3-story colonial where the wisteria climbs the wrought iron fences, and the scent of lilac in the spring mixes with the distant hum of the Bronx River Parkway. For 41 years, those walls have been the silent witness to my marriage to Richard Anderson, a man who built a hardware store empire while I built a life in his shadow. That March evening, when the air still held the last breath of a New York winter, Richard asked me out to dinner. It was so unusual that for a moment, I thought I'd forgotten an important anniversary. It had been more than 10 years since we'd had dinner alone, without the TV droning in the background or papers from his business scattered across the dining room table. I put on my lavender dress. The one he always said made me look less old, as if being 63 was an offense I had committed against him. The restaurant was Valenti's, that elegant Italian place near the county courthouse where we used to go when we were dating more than 4 decades ago. Candles flickered on crisp white tablecloths, and the waiter served a Napa Cabernet in glasses that reflected my distorted face, as if it were a premonition of what was to come. Richard wore his navy blue suit, the same one he wore for important meetings for the Anderson hardware chain. His hands, calloused by years of work but now softened by prosperity, drummed on the table with an impatience I knew all too well. At 70, he was still an imposing man, with his perfectly trimmed gray beard and eyes that had once seemed protective but now just looked at me as if they were assessing inventory. "Grace," he began after the first course arrived, "you and I have lived the life we were meant to live." His voice had that business-like tone he used with suppliers when he was about to close a deal that was unfavorable for them. "You're a good woman. You always have been. An excellent mother. A proper wife." The fork slipped from my fingers. The word proper hit me like an icy slap. That's why I think you'll understand that a man of my age in my position needs something more. He took a sip of wine, savoring it as if this were the most natural conversation in the world. "I've met someone. Younger. Her name is Jessica. She works in the corporate office in Manhattan. She's stimulating." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. The murmur of other diners faded. The clinking of glasses grew distant, and there was only our table, that slowly burning candle, and my husband's satisfied smile as he destroyed my world with the same ease he would use to ask for the check. "But I don't want a divorce," he continued, cutting his filet mignon with surgical precision. "That would be unnecessarily complicated. For the business, for the kids, for our reputation. I just want you to accept it. To act with the maturity you've always shown." What do you expect from me, Richard?" My voice sounded like a broken whisper. "Nothing really changes. You're still Mrs. Anderson, the mother of Charlie and Danielle, the lady of this house. It's just that she will also be present. At important dinners, on company trips, at the holidays. I can't keep pretending I have the vitality of a traditionally married man. I know you'll know how to behave. You've never made a scene. You're a lady." Humiliation coursed through me like acid in my veins. 41 years reduced to being a lady. 41 years of waking up at 6 a.m. to make him breakfast, of ironing his shirts, of smiling at dinners with his partners while he talked business, and I remained decoratively silent. 41 years of raising his children, managing his home, being his unpaid secretary, his nurse when he was sick, his hostess when he had guests. "You could even join me at our vow renewal next month," he added with a smile that tried to be benevolent, but struck me as obscene. "We can do it upright. At St. James the Less, where we got married. Then at the reception, she'll be formally introduced as a very special collaborator from the company. A vow renewal, with his mistress as the guest of honor." I felt the floor open up beneath me, the restaurant walls closing in on me like a tomb. The smell of the wine became nauseating, and the voices of the other diners turned into an unbearable buzz. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. I simply nodded with a smile that tore me apart inside. "Of course, Richard," I said, in a voice I didn't recognize as my own. "You've always known what's best for the family." He smiled, satisfied, and raised his glass. "To us, Grace. To the years we've built together, and to those yet to come." I clinked my glass against his, but in that moment, something inside me died, and at the same time, something else awoke. Something fierce and quiet that had been dormant for far too long. That night, while Richard slept peacefully beside me as if he'd just solved a minor inventory problem, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The shadows from the window mullions cast lines across the wall like the bars of a prison I had built with my own hands, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. But prisons? I thought, as the first light of dawn filtered through the lace curtains I had sewn myself. Prisons also have keys. And sometimes, the person you think holds them doesn't. The following weeks unfolded like a desert of forced normalcy. Richard acted as if that dinner had been a simple business conversation, like when he decided to switch a supplier for screws or repaint one of his hardware stores. He got up every morning at 7, expected his coffee with exactly 1 spoonful of sugar and his whole wheat toast with orange marmalade, just as I had made it for 4 decades. But now, as I spread the bitter marmalade he preferred, my hands trembled imperceptibly. Every routine gesture had become a stage play where I was the only actor aware I was playing a part. Richard read the Wall Street Journal, commenting on local politics and steel prices as if nothing had changed. As if my heart hadn't been shattered into a million pieces 3 weeks ago at Valenti's. One morning, while preparing his breakfast, I found his cell phone on the marble kitchen countertop. The screen lit up with a message. "Good morning, my love. Can't wait to see you." The sender was Jessica, NYC office. My stomach clenched as if I had swallowed ground glass. Richard walked into the kitchen whistling a Frank Sinatra tune with a renewed energy I hadn't seen in him for years. He picked up the phone without flinching and gave me a kiss on the cheek, the same mechanical kiss as always, before leaving for the main store in Yonkers. When he left, I stood motionless at the sink, watching the crumbs from his toast float in the soapy water. It was as if I were watching the remnants of my marriage slowly dissolving. I then remembered all the identical mornings, all the meals prepared with love that he devoured while reading the paper without a word to me, all the nights I went to bed hoping for a touch that never came. I sat in the wicker rocking chair on the patio, the one I'd bought at the Terrytown Farmers Market when Charlie was 5. The wisteria I had planted myself 15 years ago now completely covered the pergola, creating a pink and purple canopy that should have brought me peace, but it only reminded me how much time I had spent beautifying a house that was never truly mine. The memories came like an relentless avalanche. I remembered when Danielle had pneumonia at age 8, and I spent 5 sleepless nights at Westchester Medical Center. Richard showed up once, on the second day, to ask if I had canceled his dinner with the distributors from Chicago. "Business can't stop for this, Grace," he told me while our daughter was delirious with fever. "You can handle this. You've always been good at these things." I remembered the Thanksgivings where I cooked for 20 people, his brothers, his parents, his most important partners. I would start preparations a week in advance, buying the best produce, spending hours preparing the stuffed turkey, the pies, the eggnog. Richard would accept the compliments on how well one eats at the Andersons, as if the food magically appeared on the table. I also remembered when my mother died 8 years ago. I had been caring for her last 6 months, going to her little house in Terrytown every day after lunch to give her medicine, help her bathe, and talk with her so she wouldn't feel alone. The day she passed, I called Richard from the hospital, crying. "Can't this wait until I'm done with this meeting?" he asked with irritation. "She's already gone, Grace. An hour more or less isn't going to change anything." I had to arrange the entire funeral by myself. He arrived 5 minutes before the service began, stayed for the condolences because it looked good to the neighbors, and then left for the store because a big shipment had just come in. My mind continued to unravel the thread of years. I remembered when Charlie graduated with his engineering degree, and I wanted to throw a family celebration. "Don't waste money on silly things," Richard told me. The boy's a man now. He doesn't need parties. But when his main partner, Mr. Edwards, threw a reception for his son who had graduated from law school, Richard not only attended but brought an expensive gift and spoke for half an hour about the importance of celebrating family achievements. I remembered the times I got sick, and he acted as if it were a personal inconvenience. When I had my gallbladder removed 5 years ago, I hired a woman to come cook and clean during my recovery. Was it necessary to spend so much money? He complained. You could have just asked Danielle for help. Danielle, who lived in Manhattan with her family and had her own problems. But what hurt most to remember were the small daily humiliations. Like when his partners came for dinner and he would introduce me by saying, "This is Grace, my wife. She's a great cook." Never just my wife, never just my name without adding the qualifier, as if I were another household possession, or when he would talk about my opinions in front of others. Grace says that because women of her generation don't understand business. Grace thinks that way because she hasn't gotten out much. Grace is very sensitive about these things. For years, I had justified his behavior. He's from another era, I told myself. Men of his generation express love differently. He's just stressed from work. When he retires, it will be different. But Richard hadn't changed when he turned 65, nor when he turned 70. He had only found new ways to make me feel invisible. One afternoon, while organizing the family photo albums I kept in the living room closet, I paused on an image that broke my heart. It was from a vacation in the Bahamas 15 years ago. I was in it, smiling, in a floral dress, hugging the young children by the hotel pool. Richard had taken the photo, but now I realized something. In the entire series of pictures from that trip, there wasn't a single one of the two of us together. I was always with the kids, serving food, organizing activities. He appeared in separate photos, smiling with other hotel guests, talking business at the bar. It was as if I had been the family's employee, not the mother and wife. I closed the album and put it back in the closet. For the first time in my life, a terrible question began to form in my mind. Had I ever been loved? Or had I only been useful? That evening, when Richard returned from work, I noticed something different about him. He was whistling more, smiling for no apparent reason. He even asked how my day had been. But it wasn't genuine affection. It was the satisfaction of a man who had found the perfect solution to a problem. He had managed to maintain his domestic stability while securing the excitement he believed he deserved. During dinner, his phone buzzed 3 times. Each time he looked at it, his face lit up with a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in decades. "Everything all right?" I asked the 3rd time. "Perfectly fine," he answered, putting the phone away. "Everything is going exactly as I planned." Those words pierced me like a cold spear. As I planned. It hadn't been an impulsive decision. It hadn't been a momentary temptation. It had been a calculated strategy. That night, while pretending to be asleep, I heard Richard whispering on the phone in the bathroom. I couldn't understand all the words, but I caught a few. My wife, perfect. She'll never suspect. We can relax. For the first time in 41 years of marriage, I wondered if I had been a wife or simply the manager of another man's life. And for the first time in my life, that question filled me with a silent fury that burned like hot coals in my chest. The following days became a refined torture. Richard had started talking openly on the phone with Jessica, no longer bothering to lower his voice or leave the room. It was as if my presence was so irrelevant, it didn't even deserve the courtesy of concealment. One morning, while I was hanging laundry in our backyard, I heard his voice from the kitchen. "No, my love, she won't say a thing. She's old, tired. She owes me the life she has. Besides, where is she going to go? She doesn't know how to do anything but cook and clean." The clothespins fell from my hands. I stood frozen, clutching one of his shirts that smelled of his expensive cologne, the one I gave him every Christmas without ever receiving a genuine "thank you." "I assure you, Jessica," he continued, and I could hear him pacing on the tile floor I scrubbed every day. "She is predictable, submissive. In 40 years, she has never crossed me on anything important, not even when I decided to put the whole house in my name 5 years ago." My heart stopped. The house in his name? When had that happened? I remembered signing some papers, But Richard had told me they were insurance updates and routine bank paperwork. I never read the documents. I trusted him completely. Besides, he went on laughing, it's her birthday tomorrow and she hasn't even realized I haven't bought her anything. She won't dare ask me. She's too proud to ask for things, but too cowardly to demand them. My birthday. 64 years old. I had been so submerged in my pain that I had forgotten my own birthday. I dropped the shirt to the ground and crept back into the house, my heart pounding so hard I thought he could hear it from the kitchen. I hid behind the living room door and continued to listen. On Friday, we can go for lunch in the Hamptons, like you wanted. She thinks I'm going to a meeting with the suppliers from New Jersey. She never checks anything I tell her. She's perfect for this. Invisible and harmless. Invisible and harmless. The words lodged in my soul like shards of glass. When he hung up, I was already in the bathroom, vomiting silently. 41 years summed up in invisible and harmless. 41 years of waking up before him to make his breakfast, of ironing his shirts until they were perfect, of smiling when his friends ignored me at dinners, of pretending his constant slights didn't hurt. That afternoon, when Richard supposedly left to supervise the store in New Rochelle, I made a decision that would change everything. I went through our documents. In the home office, at the mahogany desk that had belonged to his father, I found the folder labeled Family Properties. With trembling hands, I started opening envelope after envelope, and what I discovered left me breathless. The house where I had lived for over 2 decades was entirely in Richard's name. The shares of the hardware business, which I had helped pay for with the small inheritance from my father, were also solely in his name. Even the car I used for errands, the white Lexus I thought was ours, was registered only to him. But the worst was in a separate folder. Household expenses, financial control. Richard kept a detailed record of everything I spent. Every trip to the market, every purchase at the pharmacy, every small indulgence I allowed myself was noted with accounting precision. March, Grace, hair salon, $50, excessive. April, Grace, dress $100, unnecessary. May, Grace, books $25, waste of time. He considered me a business expense, not a life partner. At the bottom of the folder, I found something even more devastating. Printed copies of WhatsApp conversations. Richard had been talking to Jessica for over a year, long before that terrible dinner. The messages dated back to last summer. My wife is just another piece of furniture in the house, he had written in August. Functional, but no personality. Do you think she'll notice if we start seeing each other more often? Jessica had asked. Impossible. She's too busy being the perfect little homemaker. Besides, I haven't been her husband for years. I'm just her boss. Tears began to fall on the papers, smudging the ink of my printed humiliation. An entire year. A year where I had continued to cook for him, wash his clothes, ask him how his day was, worry when he came home late. A year where I thought maybe our marriage was just going through a rough patch, that maybe when he retired we could get back some of what we had lost. But there was nothing to get back. There had never been anything real to lose. That night, I prepared his favorite dinner, roast beef with potatoes, just as I had every Friday for decades. I set the table with the good tablecloth, lit the candles, poured the wine he preferred. When he came home, he found me waiting with a smile. "What are we celebrating?" he asked, clearly surprised by the display. "Nothing special," I replied, serving his food. I just wanted to do something nice. During dinner, I watched his every move with new clarity. How he chewed with his mouth open because he knew it bothered me, but I'd never called him on it. How he didn't once ask me how my day had been. How he checked his phone 6 times during the meal, smiling each time a message came through. "Richard," I said when he finished eating. "Tomorrow is my birthday." He froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Your birthday?" "Oh, right. Of course. I had it written down somewhere." He lied so poorly I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. "What do you want to do? A small dinner? Invite the kids?" "No," I replied with a calm that surprised me. "I just want you to tell me the truth." "What truth? How long have you been with Jessica?" His face went pale. He dropped his fork on the plate with a metallic clatter that echoed in the silent dining room. "I don't know what you're talking about." A year, Richard. For a year, you've been telling her I'm a piece of furniture, that I'm invisible and harmless, that I owe you the life I have. He remained motionless for several seconds, like an animal caught in headlights. Then, to my absolute shock, he smiled. Well, he said, dabbing his mouth with his napkin as if we'd just finished a conversation about the weather. Since you know this makes things easier, we won't have to keep up the charade. The charade? Yes, Grace. The charade of pretending this is a marriage. We both know we haven't been husband and wife for years. We're roommates. And now that it's out in the open, we can be honest. You continue doing what you do well, taking care of the house, cooking, keeping everything in order. And I can finally be happy for the first time in decades. He got up from the table and patted me on the shoulder, as if he'd just given me good news. Tomorrow I'll tell Danielle and Charlie to come for dinner for your birthday. It'll be a good opportunity to explain the new situation to them. And he went to watch TV, leaving me alone with the dirty dishes and the remains of the dinner I had prepared with the last crumbs of love I had left. That night, sitting in the dark kitchen, sipping a chamomile tea that failed to calm the trembling in my hands, I made a decision. I picked up my cell phone, the one Richard had given me 2 years ago, for emergencies, and looked up a number I hadn't dialed in over 20 years. Ellie? It's Grace Miller. Yes, from high school. I need to talk to you. It's urgent. Eleanor Vance had been my best friend in high school. She later became a lawyer, specializing in family law, and from what I'd heard by chance, had become one of the top divorce attorneys in Westchester. It was time to stop being invisible. Ellie scheduled me in for the next day, on my 64th birthday. Her office was on a pedestrian-only street in White Plains, in a renovated historic building where high ceilings and wooden beams contrasted with modern glass desks and shelves full of legal codes. When I saw her after so many years, I immediately recognized the rebellious girl who had been my desk mate. Ellie's hair was completely gray, cut in a chic bob, and she wore a tailored suit that radiated authority. Her eyes, those same mischievous eyes that had helped me cheat on Latin exams, now looked at me with the professional seriousness of someone who had seen too many women shattered by abusive marriages. Grace, she said after listening to my entire story, what you're describing has a legal name: economic and psychological abuse. Your husband has systematically built a situation of absolute dependence. She explained that I could file for divorce on grounds of cruel and inhuman treatment, claim substantial financial compensation, and, since I had contributed to the family's assets for 4 decades, I was entitled to half of everything they had built together. Even if everything is in his name? I asked, in a voice I barely recognized. Especially because of that. New York is an equitable distribution state. Everything acquired during the marriage belongs to the marital estate, regardless of whose name it's registered under. Furthermore, she added, consulting her notes, your unpaid domestic labor for 40 years has a calculable economic value. We are talking about a very significant amount of money. When I left Ellie's office, the April sun hit my face with an intensity I didn't remember feeling in years. For the first time in decades, I walked the streets of my own town feeling like I had a secret, a power no one else knew. I got home before Richard and found a surprise that sent a chill down my spine. Charlie and Danielle were waiting for me in the living room, sitting on the leather sofa I had chosen, but he had paid for, drinking coffee from the porcelain cups that had belonged to my grandmother. "Mom!" Danielle exclaimed, getting up to hug me. "Happy birthday! Dad asked us to come celebrate with you." Charlie, my eldest, approached as well, but there was something tense in his movements, as if he were playing a rehearsed part. At 42, he had become a younger version of his father. Successful, pragmatic, and with that same way of looking at women as if they were problems to be solved rather than people to be loved. "Where's your father?" I asked, feigning normalcy while wondering what he had told them. "He'll be here soon," answered Danielle, my little girl who was now 39 and worked at a marketing firm in Manhattan. "He said he had something important to tell us all together." My heart sped up. Was he going to announce the situation with Jessica on my birthday? In front of my own children? Richard arrived at exactly 8, carrying a store-bought cake and a bottle of champagne. His smile was too wide, too rehearsed, like an amateur actor in the most important scene of his play. "My dear Grace!" he exclaimed, kissing me on both cheeks. 64 years old and wiser every day. Wiser. Not beautiful, not loved, not special. Wiser. As if I were a benevolent grandmother whose only virtue was accumulated experience. During dinner, which I had prepared myself as always, Richard was especially animated. He told stories from the business, asked about the kids' jobs, and even asked me several times if I was enjoying my special day. When it was time for the cake, he stood up with a glass in his hand. "I'd like to make a toast," he announced, and something in his tone put me on high alert. "To Grace, who has been the backbone of this family for so many years. A woman who has known how to hold together what matters." Charlie and Danielle raised their glasses, smiling. I kept mine motionless on the table. "And because," Richard continued, looking directly into my eyes, "strong families know how to adapt to change. They know how to evolve without losing their core values." "What changes, Dad?" Charlie asked, and I could tell he already knew the answer. Richard cleared his throat theatrically. "Your mother and I have been talking a lot lately about the future, about what we want for our golden years, and we've come to a very civilized agreement." Danielle looked at me with questioning eyes, but Charlie maintained that neutral expression that indicated this was not new information for him. "You see," Richard went on, "when couples have been together for so many years, sometimes love transforms. It becomes something more mature, more practical. Your mother has been an excellent life partner, but now we both need a breath of fresh air." "Dad, are you talking about a divorce?" Danielle asked, her voice alarmed. No, nothing so dramatic." Richard smiled as if he'd just solved a complex engineering problem. "We're talking about expanding our definition of family, about being more modern in our approach to relationships." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel my children's gazes shifting between their father and me, waiting for an explanation that wasn't coming. "Mom," Danielle said finally, "what is Dad talking about?" All eyes turned to me. It was the moment of truth. I could follow the script Richard had prepared, become an accomplice to my own humiliation, or I could speak with the honesty I had been holding back for 40 years. "Your father has met a younger woman," I said with a calm that surprised even me. "Her name is Jessica, and he wants me to accept sharing him with her." Danielle's wine glass shattered on the floor. Charlie was petrified, fork halfway to his mouth. "Mom, that can't be true," Danielle murmured. "It's completely true," Richard continued without missing a beat, as if we were discussing the purchase of a new appliance. "And your mother, being the intelligent woman she is, understands that this is for the best. No one gets hurt. No one loses anything important." "No one gets hurt?" Danielle shouted, jumping up from the table. "Dad, you're talking about cheating on Mom." "It's not cheating if there's honesty," he retorted. "It's evolving. It's being adults about our needs." Charlie, who had been silent, finally spoke. "Mom, are you okay with this?" The question hit me like a slap. My own son, asking if I was okay with my own humiliation, as if it were a business decision that required my approval. "No," I answered, and it was the first time in 4 decades that I said that word with total conviction in that house. "I am not okay with it." Richard scowled, clearly irritated that I hadn't followed the script. "Grace, we talked about this." "You talked," I interrupted. "I just listened. But I never said I would accept it." "Mom's right," Danielle jumped in. "This is insane. Dad, you can't ask this of her." But Charlie, to my absolute horror, cleared his throat. "Look, Mom," he said in that condescending tone he had learned from his father. "I understand this is difficult to accept at first, but maybe Dad has a point. Maybe it's better to be honest about the reality of your marriage." "What reality?" I asked, feeling my blood run cold. "Well, you haven't really seemed like a couple for years. And Dad deserves to be happy. He's worked very hard his whole life to provide for all of us. And what have I done for 40 years?" I asked in a voice I didn't recognize. "You've been an excellent mother," Charlie answered, as if consoling me after a layoff. "But maybe it's time for each of you to find your own happiness?" Danielle turned to her brother, her eyes blazing. "Charlie, How can you say that to Mom? Because I'm a realist, Danielle. Because I understand that sometimes marriages need adjustments. Adjustments? I screamed, and it was the first time I had ever raised my voice in that house. Adjustments? Your father wants to turn me into a second-class concubine in my own home, and you call it an adjustment. Richard slammed his palm on the table. Grace, control yourself. The neighbors will hear. Let them hear, I screamed even louder. Let the whole neighborhood hear. Let them all know that Richard Anderson wants to have 2 women and that his family thinks it's a wonderful idea. Charlie stood up, clearly uncomfortable. Mom, I think you should calm down and think about this with a clear head. Dad is offering to let you keep your position, your house, your stability. My position? I repeated. What position? That of a kept servant? In that moment, Danielle took my hand. Mom, I'm with you. This is wrong. Completely wrong. But she was the only one. My own family, the people for whom I had sacrificed my entire life, were divided. And half of them thought that accepting humiliation was the reasonable thing to do. That night, after everyone had left, leaving the house in a tense silence, I stood alone in the kitchen, looking at the remains of my birthday cake. 64 years old, and I had just discovered that my own family saw me in exactly the same way as my husband, as a useful piece of furniture that could be rearranged to suit the needs of others. But this time, something had changed irrevocably inside me. This time I had said no, and it had sounded so natural, so powerful, that I wondered why it had taken me 64 years to discover that word. The morning after my birthday, I woke up with a mental clarity I hadn't felt in decades. It was as if I had been living in a thick fog for 40 years, and suddenly the wind had blown it all away. Richard had already left for the store, leaving his dirty breakfast dishes on the kitchen table and a note. Grace, I thought you could take the weekend to reflect on everything we discussed. I'll be back Sunday night. Reflect. As if the fact that another man had used me for 4 decades was a philosophical problem requiring quiet meditation rather than an offense demanding immediate justice. I took the note, crumpled it in my fist, and threw it in the trash. Then, for the first time in my adult life, I left the dirty dishes on the table and walked out of the house. My first stop was the bank. The Chase branch where we'd had all our accounts for over 20 years, where the manager, Mr. Morrison, had known me since Charlie was little. I brought all the documents Ellie told me I would need: my driver's license, our marriage certificate, the copies of the deeds I had found in Richard's office. Mrs. Anderson, Mr. Morrison greeted me, a portly man in his 60s who had always treated me with the distant courtesy reserved for the wives of important clients. How can I help you today? I want to know exactly what my rights are concerning all the accounts and properties held in my husband's name, I said without preamble. Mr. Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. Ma'am, those are sensitive matters. Is your husband aware of this consultation? My husband does not need to be aware of my legal inquiries, I replied with a firmness that surprised me. I am his wife, not his employee, and I have a right to know my financial standing. For the next hour, Mr. Morrison explained with obvious reluctance that, yes, as a spouse in a long-term marriage, I had a claim to 50% of all assets acquired during our union. The 3 hardware stores, the house, the 2 condos Richard had bought as an investment on the Florida coast, the savings accounts, even the shares in the small distribution company he'd started with his brother. The total marital estate is valued at Mr. Morrison consulted his computer with a funereal expression. Approximately $2.6 million. The figure hit me like a lightning bolt. $2.6 million. For 4 decades, I had lived asking permission to buy a $100 dress while my husband was accumulating a fortune that was legally half mine. I want to open an account in my own name, I told him. Ma'am, that could create marital complications. The marital complications already exist, Mr. Morrison. I'm just officially acknowledging them. I walked out of the bank with a new checking account, a debit card that bore only my name, and for the first time in my adult life, the feeling of control over my own financial existence. My next stop was something I had been putting off for years: the doctor. For the last 5 years, I'd had constant back pain, frequent migraines, and trouble sleeping. But every time I mentioned an ailment, Richard would sigh impatiently and say, "Women your age always have something. It's normal." At Dr. Evans's office, a kind man in his 50s who had been our family doctor for years, I finally spoke honestly about my health. "Mrs. Anderson," he said after examining me, "you have all the classic symptoms of severe chronic stress. Your blood pressure is dangerously high, you have widespread muscle contractures, and these headaches. Are you going through a particularly difficult situation?" For the first time in decades, I told a professional the truth about my life. "Doctor, I think I've been living in a situation of psychological abuse for years without realizing it." Dr. Evans nodded gravely. "Mrs. Anderson, what you're describing has very real and very dangerous physical effects. Your body has been in a constant state of alert for years. You need professional help, and you need to make immediate changes in your life if you don't want this to lead to serious cardiac problems." He prescribed medication for my blood pressure, muscle relaxants for the knots in my back, and something more valuable than any medicine: medical confirmation that my suffering was real, measurable, and dangerous. When I got home that afternoon, there were 3 missed calls from Charlie on the landline. I called back. "Mom, Dad told me you went to the bank today." His voice was tense, accusatory. "What exactly are you doing?" "I'm learning about my rights, Charlie. It's something I should have done decades ago." "Mom, Dad's worried. He says you're acting irrationally, that maybe you need to talk to someone." The manipulation was so obvious it made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. Irrational? Is it irrational for a woman to want to know what she is legally entitled to after 40 years of unpaid labor? "Mom, you don't have to be so dramatic." "Charlie," I interrupted, "your father wants to turn me into his second-class concubine, and you think I'm the one being dramatic. That tells me everything I need to know about your opinion." I hung up the phone, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for doing it. That evening, I did something I had never done before. I ate dinner out, alone. I went to a small Moroccan restaurant in the next town over, a place I had always wanted to try, but Richard dismissed, saying, "That kind of food doesn't agree with me." I ordered chicken tagine with plums, drank green tea with mint, and for the first time in decades, I ate in silence without having to listen to complaints about work, critiques of the food, or derogatory comments about other people. The silence wasn't empty. It was peace. The waiter, a young man with kind eyes, noticed I was dining alone. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" he asked with genuine concern. "Better than ever," I replied, and for the first time in years it was completely true. Back home, I stopped in front of the foyer mirror, the one with the gold frame I had chosen but Richard always criticized as being too ornate. I really looked at myself, not with the critical gaze I'd developed after decades of his belittling comments, but with curiosity. I saw a 64-year-old woman with wrinkles that told stories of forced smiles, eyes that had cried too much in silence, but also a posture that was straighter than it had been in years. For the first time, I didn't see Mrs. Anderson, the wife of. I saw Grace Miller, a woman with rights, with opinions, with the legal power to demand justice. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. I didn't wait for Richard to get home. I didn't leave dinner for him. I didn't turn on the porch light. I simply got into my bed, in my house, and slept the sleep of someone who was beginning to take back control of her own life. The next day, Saturday, I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I dedicated the day entirely to myself. I went to the salon and got a new haircut. More modern, more daring. The stylist, Miguel, an artist with scissors who had been cutting the hair of the ladies in town for years, looked at me with approval. "Mrs. Miller, this cut takes 10 years off you. What inspired the change?" "I'm starting a new chapter in my life," I said, and the words sounded as natural as if I'd been practicing them for years. Then I went shopping. Not for groceries for Richard's dinner, not for things for the house. I bought clothes for myself, a blue dress that made me feel elegant, a linen jacket I had been admiring for months, comfortable but beautiful shoes I could use to walk around the city without depending on anyone. In the afternoon, I visited Danielle. She lived in a small apartment in the city, close to her job. When she opened the door and saw me, her face lit up. "Mom, you look different. Did you cut your hair?" Among other things, I said, smiling. We spent the afternoon talking in a way we hadn't in years. Danielle told me about her problems at work, her doubts about her relationship with her boyfriend, her dreams of traveling that she kept postponing. I told her about my discoveries at the bank, about my plans to talk to Ellie about the divorce, about the liberating feeling of making decisions for myself for the first time in decades. "Mom," she said as I was getting ready to leave, "I'm proud of you. For years I've wanted to tell you that you deserved so much more than what Dad gave you. But I didn't know how. You didn't have to tell me, honey. I needed to figure it out for myself." When I returned home that night, Richard was already back. I found him in the kitchen, opening and closing cabinets with an irritated look on his face. "Where's my dinner?" he asked without greeting me. "I didn't make it," I replied simply. "What do you mean you didn't make it? It's 9 o'clock at night." "It's 9 o'clock at night and I am 64 years old. I have cooked over 22,000 dinners in my life. Today, I decided not to cook number 22,001. He just stared at me, as if I were an appliance that had suddenly stopped working. "Grace, what is wrong with you? You're behaving very strangely." "What's wrong with me, Richard, is that I've spent the weekend discovering who I am when I'm not defined by what I do for you." And I quite liked the answer. "Have you been drinking?" I burst out laughing, a genuine, liberating laugh that came from the depths of my being. "No, Richard, I am completely sober. Maybe for the first time in 40 years, I am completely sober." The days that followed were an escalation of tension that filled the house with an electric silence. Richard alternated between attempts to regain control through emotional manipulation and barely contained fits of rage. One morning, he found me reading in the living room when he expected to find breakfast served. "Grace, this is ridiculous," he said, standing in front of me with his arms crossed. "I don't know what's gotten into you, but enough is enough. You have responsibilities in this house." "I had responsibilities," I replied without looking up from my book, a novel by Elizabeth Strout I had wanted to read for years, but never had time to open. "Now I have options." "Options? What options?" "Grace, let's be realistic. You're 64 years old. You have no college education, no work experience outside the home, no savings of your own. Without me, you have nothing." I closed the book slowly and looked him directly in the eyes. "Richard, I have half of $2.6 million. I'd say that's a little more than nothing." His face went ashen. For a few seconds, he looked like he might collapse. "You've been looking into our finances?" "I've been looking into my finances, the ones I am legally entitled to after 40 years of unpaid labor." "You can't do this," he exploded, and for the first time in decades, I saw real fear in his eyes. "Everything we have I built. My contacts, my hard work, my business vision. With my support, my domestic labor, my surrender of any life of my own, and my inheritance from my father that served as the down payment for the loan on the first store." Or had you forgotten that detail? He was speechless. It was true. The $50,000 I had inherited from my father had been crucial in securing the first bank loan. "Besides," I continued with a calm that astonished me, "according to my lawyer, I'm entitled to additional compensation for emotional distress and psychological abuse." "Your lawyer?" "What lawyer?" "Eleanor Vance. Remember her? My friend from high school. She specializes in family law. She says my case is one of the clearest she's seen in years." Richard began to pace the living room like a caged lion. "This is insane, absolutely insane. Abuse? I've given you a home, food, clothes, security for 40 years. You gave me the crumbs of what I helped build. And in return, you wanted me to be content as your kept maid while you went off to have fun with your little friend." "Don't you talk about Jessica." "Why not? If she's part of the new family structure, as you put it, I assume I can mention her freely." Just then, the phone rang. Richard lunged for it as if it were a life raft. "Charlie, thank God you called. Your mother has gone completely insane. She's hired a lawyer and is threatening to—" "What? For you and Danielle to come over?" Yes. I think that's necessary. Maybe all of us together can make her see reason." He hung up and looked at me with a mix of triumph and desperation. "The kids are coming over this afternoon. It's time this family sat down and talked like civilized adults." "Perfect," I said. "It will be the most honest conversation we've had in decades." That afternoon, Charlie and Danielle arrived together. But the difference in their demeanors was obvious from the moment they walked through the door. Charlie wore the annoyed executive expression he had perfected for dealing with difficult problems, while Danielle looked at me with eyes full of genuine support and worry. "All right," Charlie began without preamble, sitting on the sofa as if he were about to chair a board meeting. "Dad told us what's happening. Mom, we need to talk seriously." "I agree," I replied, holding my ground in the wicker rocking chair that had been my refuge for so many years. "It's time we talked very seriously." "Mom," Charlie continued in that condescending tone I found increasingly unbearable, "we understand you're upset about the situation, but legal threats are not the answer. Think about the family. Think about your future." "Charlie," I cut him off, "what future exactly are you asking me to consider?" "The future where I stay quiet while your father publicly humiliates me. The future where I pretend I don't mind being treated like a useful piece of furniture?" "Nobody is treating you like furniture." Richard jumped in. "You're the lady of this house." "I am the unpaid housekeeper of this house," I retorted. "There's a difference." Danielle, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Dad, what you're asking Mom to do is humiliating. You can't expect her to accept sharing you with another woman. Danielle, you don't understand the complexities of adult relationships," Richard shouted, finally losing his composure. "Your mother and I haven't been a real marriage in years. We're just roommates." "Exactly," I shouted back, rising from the rocking chair for the first time. "We are just roommates because you turned our marriage into a business relationship where I did all the work and you kept all the profits." "Mom, lower your voice," Charlie scolded me. "The neighbors will hear." "Let them hear," I shouted again, just as I had on my birthday. "Let the whole neighborhood hear that Richard Anderson has treated his wife like a servant for 40 years. "Grace, control yourself," Richard ordered. And that's when something inside me definitively broke. Control myself? Control myself! I marched over to the cabinet in the living room where I kept our family photo albums. I pulled out the largest one, the one documenting our first years of marriage. 40 years of controlling myself. 40 years of smiling when you humiliated me. 40 years of pretending your slights were normal. I threw open the album and started tearing out photographs. "This picture!" I yelled, holding up an image from our wedding day. "The day you promised to love and respect me. A lie!" I ripped the photo in half. "This one." I pulled out a photo from the Bahamas vacation. "When you told me I was a nuisance because I forgot the sunscreen. It was a lie that we were a happy couple." "Grace, stop!" Richard yelled, trying to grab the album from me. "No!" I screamed, shoving him away with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "I'm not stopping anymore. I've spent 40 years stopping." I kept tearing through photos, each one representing a moment where I had silently swallowed humiliation. This one from when Charlie was born, and you told me I looked like a cow after the delivery. This one from Danielle's first communion when you scolded me because my dress was too flashy. This one from our silver anniversary where you toasted to the woman who keeps my house in order. Charlie stood up, clearly frightened by my reaction. "Mom, this is concerning. Maybe you need professional help." I turned on him with a fury that had been repressed for decades. "You know what's concerning, Charlie? That you're 42 years old and think it's normal for a man to treat his wife the way your father treated me. You know what else is concerning? That when your father asked me to accept being publicly humiliated, your first reaction was to think that I should be reasonable. Mom, don't you mom me in that tone. Your mother is standing up for herself for the first time in her life and you're acting like I'm the one who's in the wrong." Danielle came over and took my hands. "Mom, you're right. You are absolutely right. And I support you completely," Richard exploded. "Danielle, don't feed her hysteria." "It's not hysteria, Dad. It's justice," my daughter yelled back. "Mom has sacrificed her entire life for this family, and when she finally rebels, you all call her crazy. Your mother is destroying this family," Richard shouted. "This family was already destroyed," I answered. "I'm just officially acknowledging that it's been dead for years." I walked over to the desk in the living room and pulled out a folder I had prepared that morning. "Richard Anderson," I said with a solemnity I had never used in my life. "I am officially notifying you that I have initiated divorce proceedings. Ellie is filing the papers on Monday. I am demanding half of the marital assets, compensation for emotional distress, and for you to vacate this house immediately." "You can't kick me out of my own house." "It's not your own house. It's our house. And according to the law, I can request exclusive occupancy while the divorce is being settled." Charlie stood up abruptly. "Mom, this is a huge mistake. You're going to destroy everything we've built as a family." I turned to him one last time. "Charlie, this family was built on my silence and my sacrifice. If those were the only foundations it had, then it wasn't worth saving." "But Mom," Danielle tried. "No, honey. I've decided. For the first time in 64 years, I've decided that my dignity is worth more than everyone else's comfort." Richard stood motionless, staring at the pieces of photographs scattered on the living room floor. 40 years, he murmured. 40 years together. "No," I said, with a deep but clean sadness. 40 years I was alone. You were just passing through." That night, after Charlie left in a fury and Danielle stayed to keep me company, I sat in my kitchen with a chamomile tea and looked out the window at the patio where the wisteria I planted with my own hands had bloomed. For the first time in 4 decades, the silence in my house didn't scare me. It gave me hope. The first few days after Richard left were strangely quiet, but not the oppressive silence I had grown accustomed to for decades. This was a clean, expectant silence, like the one that follows a thunderstorm when the air smells of wet earth and new possibilities. Richard had packed his things on a Tuesday morning while I was at Ellie's office reviewing the divorce papers. When I returned, I found he had left his keys on the kitchen table, along with a note that simply said, "I hope you know what you're doing." There was no goodbye, no final plea, nothing to suggest he regretted the end of 40 shared years. Just that final resentful sentence, as if I were a rebellious employee who had misunderstood her place in the company. The first morning I woke up completely alone in my house was like opening my eyes after a long illness. I got up slowly, without the familiar sound of Richard's shower at 6:30, without the expectation of having to rush downstairs to make his breakfast before he started calling for me from the kitchen with that restrained impatience that had set the rhythm of my mornings for 4 decades. I went down to the kitchen barefoot, something I had never allowed myself to do because Richard said that ladies don't walk around the house like that. I turned on the small radio on the counter, the one he always kept tuned to the business news station and which I had never dared to change. I found a station that played classic standards, and as Ella Fitzgerald sang "Someone to Watch Over Me," I made myself coffee in a cup I had never used. A beautiful blue porcelain cup with hand-painted flowers that I had bought years ago at a local craft fair, but never dared to use because it was too delicate for everyday use. That first coffee, sipped slowly while looking out the kitchen window at the wisteria that I could now contemplate without rush, tasted like freedom. Over the next few weeks, I began to rediscover my own house as if I were an explorer in unknown territory. I opened closets I hadn't looked in for years, found books I had bought and never read because I didn't have time, and dusted off the old record player in the living room that Richard had declared obsolete when he bought his modern sound system. I spent entire afternoons listening to Joni Mitchell, Nina Simone, and all those singers he considered too depressing. One afternoon, while organizing the master bedroom closet, I found something that made me stop cold. A shoebox containing all the love letters Richard had written to me while we were dating. I had saved them like a treasure all these years, rereading them occasionally when I needed to remember that I had once been truly loved. I took them out carefully, afraid the yellowed paper would disintegrate in my fingers, and read them one by one, sitting on the bedroom floor. "My dearest Grace," began one dated March 1980. "Every day that passes, I realize more and more that you are the most extraordinary woman I have ever met. Your laughter brightens my grayest days, and your intelligence challenges me to be a better man. I can't wait to make you my wife so I can take care of you and protect you for the rest of my life. I read letter after letter, all filled with promises of eternal love, mutual respect, and admiration for my brilliant mind and generous heart. At what point had the man who wrote to me about my intelligence turned into the man who treated me as if I were incapable of understanding anything more complex than a grocery list? When I finished the last letter, I gathered them all into a pile and took them to the backyard. I lit the small fire pit I used to burn dry leaves, and one by one, I fed the flames with those broken promises. It wasn't revenge. It was a release. It was the symbolic funeral for the woman who had believed those words and had spent 40 years waiting for the man who wrote them to return. As the letters turned to ash that the April wind scattered among the flowers in my garden, I felt as if I were shedding a weight I had been carrying for so long I had forgotten what it felt like to walk without it. With the legal process moving forward favorably, thanks to Ellie's meticulous work, I decided to do something I had been putting off for decades: travel. I had never traveled alone in my entire adult life. I had always accompanied Richard on his business trips, staying in hotels while he attended meetings, or we had taken those family vacations where I was the invisible logistics coordinator who made sure everyone else had a good time. I bought a train ticket to Boston. I had no specific reason for choosing that city, except that I had always wanted to see the Atlantic Ocean from the perspective of someone who was there by her own choice, not as someone's companion. The train ride was a revelation. Sitting by the window on the Acela, watching the New England landscape speed by, I felt as if I were seeing my country for the first time. I didn't have to worry if Richard was comfortable, if he was hungry, if he was bored. I could just look out the window and let my thoughts flow freely as the Connecticut suburbs gave way to the Massachusetts coastline. In Boston, I stayed at a small boutique hotel near Beacon Hill, in a single room with a balcony overlooking a small square filled with cafes and bookstores. It was the first time in my life I was in a hotel where I had chosen the room, I had made the reservation, I was paying the bill. I spent 3 days walking through the city like a tourist in my own life. I visited the Museum of Fine Arts and cried at the beauty of a Monet that seemed more vivid than I remembered. I got lost on the Freedom Trail, had a cocktail in a historic bar where no one knew me as Richard Anderson's wife, and bought books I'd never heard of just because I liked their covers. One evening, while dining alone in a restaurant in the North End, the waiter, an older man with a kind Irish accent, noticed I had ordered a bottle of wine for one person. "Celebrating something special, ma'am?" he asked with the gentle curiosity of someone who has seen many stories pass through his restaurant's tables. "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "I'm celebrating that I've learned to be alone without being lonely." He smiled with understanding. "That's one of the best celebrations there is." When I returned to Scarsdale after those 3 days, my house greeted me with a different warmth. It was no longer the place where I had been invisible for 40 years. It was my sanctuary, my chosen refuge, my space to be exactly who I wanted to be. One morning, while watering the plants on the patio, my neighbor Carol leaned over the fence that separated our yards. "Grace, honey," she said with that mix of curiosity and concern that characterizes the women in our neighborhood, "is it true what they're saying? That Richard has moved out?" For 40 years, I would have answered with evasions, minimized the situation, protected my husband's reputation, even at the cost of my own dignity. "Yes, Carol. We're getting a divorce. It turns out we weren't as compatible as we thought." "Oh, my dear," she sighed. "And after so many years. Are you okay? If you need anything, I'm better than I've been in decades, Carol. Truly." She was quiet for a moment, as if processing my response. "You know what, Grace? I always had the feeling you were too good for that man. He was always so serious, so cold with you. A woman needs to be looked at like she's a gift, not like she's a problem to be solved." Her words felt like an unexpected hug. For all these years I had thought my marriage looked normal from the outside, that my problems were invisible to the rest of the world. To discover that at least one person had noticed my pain made me feel less alone in my experience. That same afternoon, I received a call from Danielle. "Mom, how are you? Do you need me to stay with you for a few days?" "Honey, I'm perfectly fine. Better than I've been in years." "I'm so glad to hear that. And Mom, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. What you did took a courage I don't know if I would have." "You would have it if you needed it, Danielle. All women have more strength than they think. It's just that sometimes we need to reach our breaking point to discover it." After we hung up, I made myself a tea and went out to the patio to watch the sunset. The wisteria was more beautiful than ever, as if it had bloomed with renewed vigor now that there was no toxic tension in the air. For the first time in 64 years, I felt completely at peace with myself. It wasn't the peace of someone who has solved all her problems, but the deeper peace of someone who has accepted being exactly who she is, without apologies or explanations. As the sun set behind the rooftops of Scarsdale, painting the sky in oranges and pinks that rivaled my flowers, I thought about the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming. The first had been a shadow, a diminished version of herself created to please others. The second was me, simply me. And for the first time in my life, that felt like more than enough. 6 months after that Tuesday that changed my life forever, I wake up every morning with a feeling that took me 64 years to recognize. The genuine expectation that the day ahead belongs completely to me. The divorce was finalized 3 weeks ago. Ellie achieved something I hadn't imagined possible. The judge not only awarded me half of the marital assets, but also ruled that Richard had to pay me an additional $200,000 for proven emotional distress and decades of non-remunerated domestic contributions. The judgment stated that my contribution to the success of the family business had been systematically invisibilized and deserved financial recognition. When Ellie read me the verdict over the phone, I sat in my patio rocking chair and cried for an hour. But they weren't tears of pain, but of something I didn't know what to call until Danielle arrived that afternoon and found me with swollen eyes. "Mom, are you okay?" "I'm validated," I said, testing the word as if it were a new flavor. For the first time in my life, someone with official authority has said that what I lived through was unfair, that my pain was real, that I deserved better. Richard tried to appeal the ruling, but according to Ellie, his chances of success are minimal. The judge was very clear, she explained. "Your case is a textbook example of economic and psychological abuse. The documentation you found of his derogatory comments, combined with the testimony of how he handled the family finances, created an irrefutable case. With my new financial situation, I made decisions that the Grace of 6 months ago would not have even dreamed of considering. The first was to completely redecorate the house, not because it was in poor condition, but because I needed every corner to reflect my tastes, not the compromises I had made for decades to keep the peace. I hired Sarah, a young interior designer from a shop in town. When I explained what I was looking for, her eyes lit up. "I want it to be a home for a woman who has just gotten to know herself," I told her. "Colors that I like, furniture where I feel comfortable, spaces that invite creativity and rest." Sarah understood immediately. Together, we chose warm tones for the walls, a soft yellow for the kitchen that makes even cloudy days seem sunny, a sage green for the master bedroom that reminds me of gardens I've loved. We bought a round, light wood table for the dining room, smaller than the old one, but perfect for the intimate dinners I now prefer. In the living room, where the black leather sofa Richard had chosen for being elegant and masculine once dominated, there is now a cream-colored fabric sofa with embroidered pillows I bought at a craft fair. It is infinitely more comfortable, and most importantly, it is completely mine. The most significant transformation was in the office that had been Richard's exclusive territory. I threw out all his business files, donated his economics and finance books to the local library, and turned the space into my own sanctuary. Now there are shelves full of novels, biographies of extraordinary women, cookbooks from different countries, and travel guides for places I want to see. I set up a small desk by the window where I write in a journal every day, recording not my obligations or the activities of others, but my own thoughts, dreams, and daily discoveries. 3 months ago, I decided to do something I had been putting off for decades, learn something completely new. I enrolled in a painting class at the local art center. I had painted a little when I was young, before I got married, but Richard had always considered art a waste of time for people without real responsibilities. The first class was both terrifying and liberating, being surrounded by women of different ages, all exploring their creativity without asking anyone's permission, made me feel like I was rediscovering a part of my soul that had been hibernating for decades. My teacher, Laura, A 70-year-old local artist with stark white hair and hands permanently stained with paint told me something in the third class that has stayed with me ever since. Grace, your problem isn't technical. You paint with fear, as if you have to ask the canvas for permission before you put color on it. Art requires the courage to take up space, to be seen, to exist without apology. She was right. For 40 years I had lived asking for permission to exist, minimizing my presence so as not to bother, holding back my voice so as not to inconvenience. Learning to paint became learning to take up space without being sorry for it. My first finished work was an oil painting of the wisteria in my yard, painted with colors more vibrant than they really are, because I discovered that I prefer reality intensified by emotion over a literal representation of what is. One afternoon, while working on my second painting, a portrait of my mother from an old photograph I keep on my nightstand, I received an unexpected visitor. Charlie appeared at my door, wearing the uncomfortable expression he had perfected for difficult conversations he preferred to avoid. "Mom, can we talk?" I invited him in, made coffee, and waited. For the first few minutes, he looked around the house with obvious surprise. Everything had changed so much that he probably felt like a stranger in the place where he had grown up. "It looks really different," he finally commented. "It looks like me," I replied without defensiveness. For the first time in decades, this house reflects my tastes. He was silent for a long moment, sipping his coffee from one of my new ceramic mugs, very different from the formal china we had used for years. "Mom," he said finally, "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened, and I think maybe I was wrong." "What were you wrong about, Charlie?" "About how I reacted when all this started. About what I said to you. About not understanding what was really happening." "And what was happening?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. "Dad was treating you badly, and I normalized it because that's how I was raised. To see that behavior as normal." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Not because they were cruel, but because they were absolutely true. "Charlie," I said gently, "I can't change how we raised you, but I can make sure you understand something. Mutual respect is non-negotiable in a healthy relationship. Your father and I gave you the wrong example for years. I know that now, and I want you to know that I'm proud of what you did, of how you stood up for yourself. Really, really. And I want to get to know this version of you, the real you." That conversation marked the beginning of a new relationship between Charlie and me. Not the mother-son relationship built on traditional roles where he expected me to be unconditional support, with no reciprocal expectations, but a relationship between two adults who respect each other. Now he comes to visit every couple of weeks, not out of family obligation, but because he genuinely enjoys our conversations. He asks me about my paintings, my travel plans, the books I'm reading, and for the first time in his adult life, he also talks to me about his own fears, doubts, and aspirations beyond professional success. Danielle, for her part, has become my partner in adventure. Last month we went to Santa Fe together, a 4-day trip where we were mother and daughter, but also friends exploring the world with no agenda other than the pleasure of discovering new places together. As for Richard, I learned from Ellie that his relationship with Jessica ended 2 months after our divorce. Apparently, she had expected to become the new Mrs. Anderson with access to all the comfort that entailed, but when she discovered that a large part of the estate had gone to me, she quickly lost interest. Richard now lives in a small apartment near his main hardware store. According to Danielle, who maintains minimal contact with him, he is visibly aged and bitter. He constantly talks about how unfair the asset division was, she told me, as if he's completely forgotten why we got to that situation in the first place. I don't feel satisfaction in his loneliness, but I don't feel pity either. I feel more than anything a profound indifference. It's as if Richard were a very long chapter in a book I finally managed to finish. I can remember what happened without those memories defining or hurting me. This morning, while sipping my coffee on the patio and admiring the wisteria that has grown lush during these months of peace, I realized something extraordinary. Several days have passed without me thinking about him. For 40 years, Richard had occupied constant mental space in my life, if only to anticipate his needs, his moods, or his criticisms. Now, my mind is occupied with my own projects, my own plans, my own emotions. I've started to write. Not a personal diary, but something more ambitious. A book about my experience that I hope can help other women who find themselves in similar situations. Ellie suggested the idea when I told her how my perspective on marriage and self-worth had changed. "Grace," she said, "your story isn't unique, but your courage to change it is. Many women could benefit from hearing about your process. The book is progressing slowly, but every word I write feels like an act of reclamation. I am telling my own story from my own perspective, without filters, without excuses, without trying to protect anyone's reputation but my own." As I finish writing these lines, in my converted studio that smells of fresh paint and is filled with natural light, I wonder what would have happened if I had found the courage to stand up for myself 10, 20, 30 years earlier. But I immediately dismiss that question because it leads nowhere useful. The truth is, the right time to reclaim your dignity is always now. The right time to say no more is always the moment you finally find the strength to say it. It took me 64 years and a proposal so humiliating I could no longer ignore it. Other women might find their breaking point sooner or later, or in completely different ways. What matters is not when you wake up, but that you do. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is choosing yourself, and sometimes, justice does arrive, with a name, a date, and a final judgment. Have you also loved so much that you forgot your own worth? Have you known someone who has lived through something similar? Let me know in the comments if this story has touched you in any way. If you liked this account, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Every story I share here is meant to reach someone who needs to hear it. And maybe, just maybe, my words can be the push someone needs to write their own happy ending.